Welcome to Beat Diabetes. On today's program, we'll be talking about a man who cheated. You're only supposed to get your A1c done about every 3 months. But this man had changed his diet and he was so excited he had to find out what his new A1c was and couldn't wait those 3 months, so he did it in only 2 months, had another A1c done, and found he had dropped it 7 full points. We'll also be talking about weight issues with the keto diet. I've had all kinds of questions about the idea of being too thin for keto or too thin to do low carb. People worry about that all the time. And they'll just say, I'm skinny. I can't go low carb, or I'll just lose so much weight, it'll be terrible. Or I can't go keto, or if I go keto, I'll just lose more weight. And what's going to happen then? I'll look like a stick. Well, I understand that can be a problem, and a lot of people want to know, how can I stay at a good weight on keto? Now, for a lot of people, it's the other way around, but some people, they're slim. And they're wanting to know, how can I keep my weight up with keto? I'm afraid I'll lose too much weight. Well, let me just tell you a little of my experience. And when I started having my blood sugar problems, and it was bouncing all over the place, I cut my carbs, as you know, and I did lose weight. Up until that time, I was weighing as much as 190. Now, I'm 5 feet 10 inches tall. So I'm not a real tall guy, not short exactly, but not real tall. And at 5 feet 10 and 190, I had a nice round belly. I had a bit of a belly. And otherwise, I looked good. My face looked good. And I never really looked like an obese person unless you looked at my stomach, and then you'd know I was overweight. But when I went low carb, the weight came off, as it tends to do. And I dropped into the 180s, 170s, 160s. I got as low as low 150s for a while. Now, there are some people that could be at 150, 5 feet 10, and look pretty good, but not me. I looked terrible at 5 feet 10 and 152 or whatever it was I got to. I didn't look good. I knew I didn't. People told me I didn't. What's wrong with you, Dennis? You just look so skinny. Now, 5 feet 2 is not exactly terribly thin. 5 feet 10, 152 is not terribly thin, but for me it looked bad. And I knew it did, but I was feeling better, and my blood sugar was under control, and I no longer had the high spikes and all of that. So I just let it ride for a while, and I stayed looking skinny for a couple of years. And at one point, as I was seeking a wife, of whom Benedicta became my wife, and praying for a wife, I knew my chances might increase if I looked a little bigger. So I started stuffing myself with low-carb foods more and just forcing myself to eat more. One thing I had a habit of doing on Sundays after church was to get a double cheeseburger from McDonald's. I would keep the bottom bun. I'd take off the top bun. I started getting 2 double cheeseburgers, and I just put the 2 patties on top of the other 2 patties and still just had the 1 bottom bun. And I just started eating more. And guess what? The weight started coming on, and I started gaining weight, and I got into the 160s. So I know there are a lot of keto folks that will tell you that the calories in model of gaining weight means nothing. I've never totally bought that. I still believe calories do matter a bit. The idea that you can just stuff yourself with low-carb foods and keto foods and you'll always be thin, I'm not sure that's true. And for me, it just was simple. The more I ate, the more I gained, but I just made sure I ate low-carb, and I checked my spikes to make sure that they were fine, and they were. And I went up. Now, after a while, I didn't have to force myself to eat much. I got into the rhythm of eating so much, and I was in the 160s for a while, and then I started drifting up into the 170s. Now, when I started moving up into the high 160s, low 170s, I wasn't trying anymore. It was just happening. Not so much, not because I was going high carb. I never did that again. But I started learning all kinds of foods I could eat and enjoy that were keto or low carb, and I just ate more. And I drifted up. Now today, let me just tell you where I am. And I know some people think I look thin, and I can tell looking in the mirror that, yeah, I do look a little bit thin. But I'm struggling these days to stay under 170. I'm guessing if I was over 180 at 5 feet 10, I would be considered overweight. So I'm not all that far from being technically overweight, although I know I don't look like it. But I like to keep my weight under 170. I know that if I weighed 180, I'd probably look a little better. But I'm doing okay. I've got a beautiful wife. I've got a good life. If I look a little bit on the thin side and keep my glucose low and live to be 85 rather than die early, why, that's kind of a good thing. So generally, my conviction is that when you first go keto or you first go low carb, you're going to lose some water weight to start with. So that hardly counts because that'll come back. Secondly, you're going to lose weight because you're not provoking all the insulin response, and that's going to be true perpetually if you stay low carb. But thirdly, you lose weight because you just don't know what to eat in those early days. I didn't. I knew what not to eat. I didn't really know so much what to eat. I knew I could eat hamburger patties and a lot of meat, and I knew I could eat salads. But there's a lot of stuff I didn't know, and there's a lot of keto recipes I had no clue about, which I do now, and a lot of keto desserts I had no clue about, which I do now. So as I learned more recipes and more things that I could eat that were still low carb, I ate more, I enjoyed my meals more. And nowadays, being thin is not a problem for me. I could easily be 175, 178 and still be low carb. That would not be a problem. I just don't allow myself to do that. And just like I use Mike the Meter a lot to keep myself honest and to keep myself doing what I need to do, I weigh myself frequently. And if I start getting at 169, 170, I cut back a little bit on how much I eat, and then I try to keep it between 165 and 168, and for the most part, I do pretty good. So that's my experience. I would say this: if you're thin, I'd still go low carb because I think that's the healthiest way. But I'd eat more, and of course, there's some high calorie foods like cream, like butter, like cheese, like nuts that are still fairly low carb or quite a bit low carb, and yet they'll put in some calories, and they should help you to gain some weight. All right, here is a note from a man from Sweden. I'm constantly amazed at how this YouTube channel goes out all over the world. This man is from Sweden, which to me sounds exotic. Now, I know you Swedes, to you, America may sound exotic. America just seems normal to me because that's where I'm from. But anyway, he's from Sweden. Dear Mr. Pollock, thank you for your fantastic, inspiring, and helpful channel. Yours was the first channel I found after my diagnosis of type 2 diabetes. I've learned a lot from you, and maybe this is the most important, he says. Test and test again. I'd say, yeah, that's kind of what I'm known for. Test and test again. He says, I can't emphasize enough how important this has been for me. In return, I want to tell you my story. When I had my diagnosis of being diabetic, I had an A1c of 14. 14, folks, is about as high as you normally hear. I know we've had a couple 17s or 15, 16, but normally 14 is like about as bad as it gets, and you're still able to function in life. So this guy was really, really bad, severe diabetes. He says, I changed my lifestyle. I started cutting down on carbs drastically. He says, I've always skipped breakfast and often lunch just because I'm lazy in nature. That's pretty amazing. Most people, no matter how lazy they are, they'll still find a way to eat, but he often would skip meals. He said, so I found myself pretty naturally moving over to one meal a day. So he went OMAD, one meal a day, and a pretty strict low-carb, high-fat diet, almost keto. He says, it's been 2 months and a few days. So this is not like we're talking about somebody who just discovered this. Now, I think he left this note for me some time ago. This is not something I saw recently. I've had this on my computer for a while, but I'm finally getting around to reading it. But anyway, when he wrote this, it was just a couple of months. He says, the last 3 weeks, my average blood sugar is 102. And when he says average, he says this includes tests I take 60 minutes and 120 minutes after a meal. So 1-2 hours afterwards. And he's averaging all those out. And his average, and with all those post-tests, that should be when your glucose is at its highest 1 and 2 hours later. And instead, he says it's averaging 102. He says before meals, I'm never over 90. Well, this guy's doing better than me. I'm sometimes significantly over 90 before meals. He says, I'm never over 90 before meals. My A1c is 7.5. Now, keep in mind, this is just 2 months from a 14 A1c. So he hasn't even allowed the full 3 months, or 4 months really, to be on the safe side to find out what his new normal is. But he's already down to 7.5 from 14. Tremendous. Fantastic, phenomenal, wonderful. Any adjectives you can think, add them on. This is great. He says, I still have some ways to go, but how about that difference? 14.1 to 7.5 in 2 months. Not 3 months, not 6 months, not a year. If somebody came to me and said, in a year's time, I went from a 14 A1C down to a 7.5, I'd say, well, you're doing great. You're making good progress. I mean, I would say that. 7.5 is certainly not ideal. I would encourage people to get lower, but to go from 14 down that way, that's great. Almost whatever the amount of time, but he does it in 2 months' time. He says, I've lost 44 pounds as well. I feel better than ever. Well, I'd be shouting hallelujah too. In short, I have more or less driven away the scary dragon I was faced with just by eating better. So he doesn't mention exercise. Exercise is good. It's helpful. It is a small part of beating diabetes, but it's not the major part, and he seems to know that. He says, just by changing my diet, eating better, cutting those carbs out, I am doing so much better. He says, I'm never super hungry, just a little bit hungry before supper. I feel better than ever. The dragon, diabetes, can be defeated. Wow, you sense excitement in this. Sometimes as you read the words, you can feel the emotion behind the words. And when I read these words from this fella, I can feel emotion. I can feel excitement. I can feel euphoria. I can feel confidence coming from this man because he is seeing the victory. And there used to be an ABC Sports special on Saturdays, and they talked about the thrill of winning and the agony of defeat. Well, winning feels a lot better than being defeated by diabetes. And he's watching these numbers, and he's one of these blessed people that when he goes to the doctor to get a test, he already knows the outcome. He knows it's going to come out well. He knows that because he's been testing himself at home. So he's one of these that says, man, I can't wait to go to the doctor. I can't wait to get an A1c. I can't wait to test my glucose in the morning. I can't wait to see what my glucose is like an hour after I eat this meal because he knows it's going to be good. When I started college, I didn't try, and I got very mediocre grades for about the first year. And suddenly I got on fire and decided to start really studying. And I went from where I dreaded to get my tests back because I knew the grade wouldn't be very good. But after I started studying, I was excited to get the test scores because I knew they would be good. And that's how people like this gentleman are, and you can be as well. You can be excited about your next A1c, your next glucose test, because you can see with your eyes that the victory is yours. Wow, wow, wow. Mike has told him you're a winner. You're not a loser. You're not being defeated. You are winning. And it just came by cutting his carbs down and being a little bit wise in his eating.